In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on December 31st, 2025, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Virginia versus Virginia Tech. Cassell Coliseum on New Year's Eve feels less like a gym and more like a pressure cooker, and this year it is the team in Navy that walks in looking surprisingly comfortable with chaos. Virginia sits at 11-1, playing with a swagger that feels very different from the slow, patient crews you remember. Under the new staff, they have turned the dial way up on offense, living around 87 points a night with a scoring margin in the neighborhood of plus 20, which is literally the second highest scoring pace in program history. They still guard, they still compete on every catch, but now they press more, turn teams over, and attack downhill instead of walking the ball across half court and staring at the shot clock. It is the same brand name, but a very different product. Across from them you have Virginia Tech at 11-2, perfect at home, and completely comfortable in track meets. They have already played in a 107-101 game with Providence and an 86-83 overtime win at South Carolina, and those are not scorelines you get by accident. This Hokies group can shoot, they can put the ball on the floor from a lot of spots, and Cassell's tight, loud feel tends to make every made three feel like it adds 5 points instead of 3. The catch is that their defensive personality is more "we will score one more than you, then we will lock you up," sitting in that range where they give up low 70s on average and can drift into the 80s against teams that keep coming at them. That is exactly where Virginia is most annoying right now. The Cavaliers have real size and length on the floor, with a front line that crashes the glass as if every miss is personal. They sit near the very top of the country in offensive rebounding percentage, around 41%, which means on almost half of their missed shots they get a second look. You can feel how tiring that becomes over 40 minutes, especially for a defense like Tech's that already leans hard on making jumpers at the other end. Miss once, defend for 20 seconds. Miss twice, defend for 40. By the time you get to the last media timeout, legs are heavy, closeouts are slow, and all those extra possessions start to snowball. Virginia has also already proved that this new style travels. They have handled solid teams like Dayton and Maryland away from their own building, scoring in the 80s while still bothering people with that pressure and length. Virginia Tech, on the other hand, has looked best when the friendly rims and the home crowd give them a little extra juice, and their defense has not always kept pace with their shooting when the game turns into a grind. So on paper it almost feels like a coin flip because of the rivalry, and the history in this series does scream anything can happen, but the more you zoom in on how these two actually win possessions now, the more it feels like the deeper, more physical, more balanced roster has the cleaner path to covering a 2-possession number. As our first pick for this matchup, the Virginia Cavaliers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. If you only remember the old rock fights between these two schools, a number in the low 150s sounds wild. A few seasons ago, a Virginia game in the Atlantic Coast Conference sitting around a projected 153.5 points would have looked like a typo. Now it looks pretty reasonable. Virginia is the biggest reason why. They are averaging roughly 87 points per night and doing it without playing reckless, which is a strange thing to wrap your head around if you still picture them as that team milking every possession to the last second. They might not be racing the ball up on every single rebound, but they are incredibly efficient. They spread the floor, and they let multiple guards and wings touch the ball before the shot goes up. They have already stacked up several games in the 80s and even a few in the 90s, and the official notes literally describe this as one of the highest scoring versions of the program ever. When a team like that also lives on the offensive glass, you are baking extra possessions and extra free throws into every matchup. Virginia Tech brings their own fuel to the fire. They sit in the low 80s themselves at about 83 points a game, and they have shown they are very comfortable in scorelines that feel more like pickup runs than January conference grinders. That 107-101 win over Providence is the kind of result that sticks in odds makers' minds, and the 86-83 overtime thriller at South Carolina fits the same pattern. Lots of shot making, not a lot of long, empty trips. At home, with their shooters feeling good and the crowd bouncing, they rarely look in a hurry, but they also are not burning clock just for the sake of it. They let their guards play, they hunt mismatches, and they are perfectly happy to trade baskets for stretches. Put those two profiles together, and you get a pretty clear script for a high total. You have one team that is elite on the offensive glass and lives in the 80s now, and another that can get hot from three, willingly plays at a comfortable, free-flowing tempo, and has already put multiple opponents in the 90s. Even if the game tightens up in spots, the combination of threes, second chance points, and whistles in a rivalry setting is tailor-made for long stretches where the scoreboard operator is busy. And if this turns into the classic late-game situation where one side is chasing and is forced to foul, those last 90 seconds can feel like a whole extra mini-game on the total. Recent history in the series also nudges things in that direction. Last season they played a 75-74 game in Charlottesville and a 73-70 contest in Blacksburg. Both flew over the lower totals that were posted back then, and that was before this particular Virginia roster started averaging high 80s on the year. So if you imagine a typical Atlantic Coast Conference rivalry game, but shift both offenses a few points higher, keep the same emotional intensity, and drop them into a loud building on New Year's Eve, it is not hard to picture a final score landing somewhere in the mid-150s or even creeping toward 160 if both teams stay efficient. There is always the risk of a cold shooting night or tight whistles that slow the rhythm, but given how both squads are wired right now, the math and the basketball logic are pulling in the same direction. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Clemson versus Syracuse. Let's set the stage for this one real quick, because it actually matters for how this game feels, not just how it looks on a betting screen. You have Clemson coming in as a small road favorite, market treating them as the slightly steadier grown-up in the room, while Syracuse walks into this thing with Atlantic Coast Conference opener energy and a fan base that has already circled this date. Both teams are on a roll with recent wins, both have looked like tournament-level squads for stretches, and both have already seen real competition instead of loading up on cupcakes. Analytics lean one way, with the projection models nudging this toward a 1 or 2 point Syracuse win, but the actual line tilting to Clemson tells you where the money and respect for Clemson's current form are landing right now. And just to keep this grounded, nothing here is a guarantee. It is all probability and storytelling, so treat it like an angle, not a promise. Now, for the side, here is where it gets interesting. Clemson is playing like a team that knows exactly who it wants to be, even with so many new faces, and that shows up in all the little things that swing spreads, not just highlight plays. They defend with purpose, close out shooters with length instead of panic, and they turn defensive stops into calm, organized possessions on the other end instead of rushed, hero ball threes. You can see it in their body language late in games. They do not look surprised to be in tight spots because they have already gone on the road, taken real punches from good teams, and still found ways to finish games with composure. That kind of personality matters even more in a league opener in a loud building when whistles get random and momentum swings feel bigger than they really are. On top of that, Clemson's offense is not some grinding throwback that needs games in the 50s to survive. They are comfortable winning in the high 60s or the high 70s, and they can do it through inside power, through cutters, or by letting their guards work the lane off ball screens. They are also very happy to live on the glass, and that matters against a Syracuse team that can sometimes treat defensive rebounding like a suggestion rather than a rule. Every extra rebound, every extra tip that turns into a reset is another chance for Clemson to squeeze a few more efficient possessions out of a game that the market expects to be decided at the margins. Even if the shots are not falling early, that ability to extend possessions wears on a defense, and over 40 minutes it very quietly pushes a small favorite toward the number. Syracuse, on the other hand, brings chaos energy in the best and worst ways. When they are cooking, the dome feels like a pressure cooker, threes start falling in bunches, and transition chances show up out of nowhere because of deflections, blocks, and the crowd roaring at every semi-break. They just pushed an elite Houston team to overtime on a neutral floor. They already own a big boy win over Tennessee, and with Donnie Freeman back in the lineup, their ceiling on a single night is legitimately high. Freeman gives them that give me the ball and move option that changes how you defend everything, because now you cannot treat their wings as just spot-up accessories. He bends the defense and opens up space for teammates. That is exactly why this spread is so tight. Syracuse absolutely has the puncher's chance to control the game for long stretches. But here is the thing, the same traits that make Syracuse scary also make them fragile against a composed, physical team like Clemson. They rely on rhythm, spurts, and emotion more than Clemson does, and we have already seen that when the whistles start sending them to the line, their free throw issues can completely undercut otherwise great possessions. You cannot afford to waste that many trips at the stripe if the other side is calmly walking up, getting the shot at once, and then walking back to set its half-court defense. Add in that Syracuse is still recalibrating rotations with Freeman stepping back into a heavy role, with someone else's minutes and rhythm naturally getting squeezed, and you have a classic spot where the more stable identity often wins the slow tug-of-war against the spread. Clemson has already proven it can win ugly, win close, and win late against good teams, and that travel-tested composure is exactly what you want attached to a short favorite number in a game like this. As our first pick for this matchup, the Clemson Tigers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Odds makers hanging a total in the low 140s are basically saying, we think the defenses are real, but the modern spacing and foul volume are going to do some work. On paper that sounds reasonable. Clemson's defense is very real. Syracuse's length and shot blocking around the rim are legit, and both coaches are comfortable grinding in the half court when they have to. But basketball games are not played on paper. They live in pace swings, whistles, and what happens when tired legs and loud crowds collide in the final 8 minutes. Clemson, for its part, is the kind of team that quietly pulls totals up, even when people assume the opposite. They score efficiently enough that a few clean early sets can flip the script from slow Atlantic Coast Conference slugfest to, oh, we are on a 75-72 kind of track now. They get to the free throw line at a solid clip, they pound the glass, and they are willing to push opportunistically after stops instead of walking the ball up every time. That does not mean they are a run-and-gun outfit, but it means they are not allergic to pace, especially when they sense a mismatch in transition matchups or trailing shooters. Syracuse is where the tempo really swings. When they are right, they love that first or second action in a possession, drag screens, quick pull-ups, early threes before the defense gets its feet under it. All of that plays into possessions ending early in the clock. They just played an overtime track meet with Houston that still had long stretches of heavy defense, which tells you how fast their games can spike when both sides have athletes and shot makers on the floor. Even without perfect execution, their style tends to create either layups, threes, or fouls, all of which are friendly to an over, especially at home where the refs hear the crowd on every drive and bump. There is also the free throw variable, which is messy but important. Syracuse has already shown they can leave a pile of points at the line, which sounds like an argument against the over, but it can cut both ways. If they keep attacking and keep drawing fouls, you get more clock stoppages, more bonus situations, and more possessions extended by offensive rebounds off misses. Clemson, on the other side, is steady enough at the stripe that constant whistles tend to help their scoring more than it hurts, and they are disciplined about driving through contact instead of settling for 30-footer hero shots. So if this turns into a whistle-heavy game with both teams in the bonus for long stretches, the math can drift toward a higher total even if one team does not shoot a pretty percentage at the line. Another subtle thing that leans toward points is how both teams handle late-game scenarios. If this plays out as the close battle the models and the line suggest, you are likely looking at a tight final 2 minutes, which is where fouling, timeouts, set plays, and scramble threes start to inflate scores beyond how the first 35 minutes felt. Clemson is comfortable executing late offense. Syracuse is never shy about firing a quick three when chasing, and those endgame possessions are exactly where a total sitting around the low 140s can suddenly cross the finish line with room to spare. Factor in Freeman's return, adding another legitimate scoring option for Syracuse and Clemson's ability to punch back from multiple spots on the floor, and it is easier to imagine this drifting upward than collapsing into a pure defensive slog for all 40. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Georgia Tech versus Duke. You have Duke sitting at 11-1, ranked in the national top 10, and acting like the heavyweight everyone expected. And then you have Georgia Tech, 9-4, wandering in after polishing off its best non-conference start since the middle of the last decade. On paper, a spread in the mid-20s looks like the books telling you this is a formality, just another home Atlantic Coast Conference blowout with the crazies howling and a blue wave rolling downhill. But when you zoom in a bit, the shape of the game, not the name on the jersey, starts to matter more. Georgia Tech is not built like the small by-game visitors that usually walk into Cameron hoping the score clock moves faster. They are long at the wings, sturdy at the 5, and they just closed non-conference play by winning 4 straight games, including that Florida A&M beatdown where they led by more than 30 before easing off. That kind of stretch does 2 things. First, it gives them real on-court reps of playing from ahead, getting stops, and not panicking when the other team punches back. Second, it quietly builds a locker room belief that they actually belong on the floor with anybody, which is a big deal when you are stepping into one of the loudest buildings in college hoops. Style helps the underdog here too. Georgia Tech is not a pure run-and-gun outfit. They are more of a team that lets their defense and physicality pull tempo into that slightly faster than average, but still very manageable, range. They lean into length on the perimeter, and their front court bodies make driving the lane feel like trying to parallel park a truck in a compact space. That matters when you are talking about covering numbers this big, because it is far easier to lose by 30 when you are flying up and down trading early clock jumpers than when possessions actually feel heavy. If they can make Duke run real offense for 2 or 3 actions instead of just letting them live in transition and early drag screens, the math on a 26-plus margin starts to get uncomfortable for the favorite. Now flip it around and think about Duke's side of this. They are excellent, no question, but their greatness this season is built as much on suffocating defense and poise as it is on some highlight reel scoring binge. They guard at an elite level, they grind teams into bad shots, and they do not have to play at warp speed to feel in control. That identity is fantastic for stacking wins, but it is not always perfect for routinely clearing massive spreads because games that stay structured and deliberate tend to leave small windows open for the underdog to creep in just under the number late. You can almost picture it. Duke up 21 with 3 minutes left, starters easing off, Cameron buzzing but not quite losing its mind, and Georgia Tech's second unit still competing because for them every minute in that building is a big career moment. Those last couple of trips, the ones that do not make the highlight packages on SportsCenter, are exactly where big underdogs steal covers. There is also the human side. Duke just came out of a high-profile non-conference stretch that included a rock fight at Michigan State, a tight one against Florida, and that gut-punch loss to Texas Tech where they blew a huge lead. When a young team gets told all month long how good it is, then takes a public hit, the first game back home can split 2 ways. Either they walk in angry and play the full 40 with a killer edge, or they handle their business, establish control, and mentally move on to the next big challenge once the win feels secure. Covering an inflated spread needs the first version. Simply winning comfortably only needs the second. And if you are catching a pile of points with a live, confident underdog, you are quietly rooting for that very normal human tendency to coast once the outcome, not the margin, feels safe. Georgia Tech's own situation helps the mentality piece. This is their Atlantic Coast Conference opener in a season where the roster was rebuilt around size, defensive length, and a deeper backcourt. They have already been punched in the mouth a few times. They lost at Georgia in a, let us say, emotionally charged rivalry game, and they still finished non-conference on a 4-game heater. That kind of path usually hardens a group. You are not walking into Cameron starstruck. You are thinking, we just handled our business for 2 straight weeks. Why not us for at least 30 or 35 good minutes here? And for our purposes, 30 or 35 good minutes is often all it takes to cash a big dog ticket. Put all that together and you have a matchup where Duke's high-end quality is already fully baked into the number, but the subtle things, the way Tech's length can muddy possessions, the way Duke's slower, methodical control style can compress margins, and the human urge to exhale once the game is in hand, all point in the same direction for the spread. As our first pick for this matchup, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Odds makers have dropped a total in the low 150s for this one, which is a big number for a game that has every chance to feel like a statement about defense, discipline, and control, rather than a YouTube mixtape of endless transition threes. Duke loves to score, nobody is denying that, but the way they arrive there is not the same as some freewheeling mid-major that lives or dies by chucking early shots. Their efficiency is built on shot selection, ball movement, and using their talent edge to squeeze clean looks out of half-court sets. That kind of offense racks up points over time, but it also uses the clock. You get those possessions where they probe for 15 seconds, reverse the ball side to side, then finally attack a matchup they like. Great for winning, sneakily friendly to unders when the total is inflated. Defensively, Duke is doing something that is almost boring in how effective it is. They just suffocate people. Opponents are shooting poorly from the field, struggling to get clean threes, and often running into late clock situations where they are forced into low percentage heaves. That kind of profile does not guarantee an under by itself, but it absolutely raises the bar for any game that needs both teams to keep climbing into the high 70s or low 80s to clear the number. You can feel it in some of their recent results too. The Michigan State game lived in the 60s on both sides. Florida barely cracked the mid-60s, and even some of their bigger wins have landed in that zone where the margin is wide, but the total is still modest compared to the pregame line. Georgia Tech's profile fits that script more than it fights it. They have enough size and athleticism to keep Duke from living at the rim, and their own offense is better described as methodical with bursts than constant full-throttle chaos. When they are at their best, they are getting downhill in controlled gaps, playing through their bigs on touches, and letting their shooters step into rhythm threes rather than hunting wild pull-ups. That tends to flatten the game out. You get fewer quick, sloppy possessions, fewer runouts the other way, and more trips that look like real, drawn-up basketball. Fun for purists, quietly helpful if you are thinking about a number that assumes both teams combine for a steady stream of easy points. There is another wrinkle that people sometimes underplay when they think about big favorites at home. If Duke gets out in front and the lead feels safe, their incentive late is not to chase the total, it is to protect their core rotation. They already have one front-court piece out for the season and another sidelined with an undisclosed issue, so burning extra minutes in a decided game would be asking for trouble. When bench is empty, offenses usually get sloppier, spacing gets worse, and the rhythm that drove scoring early stalls out. You can still see a flurry of junk time buckets, sure, but more often you get a mix of missed shots, free throws, and clock-burning possessions that chew time without throwing 10 extra points on the board. And from Georgia Tech's side, their path to staying competitive already leans in the same direction as a lower total. They do not want this to turn into a full-court race because that plays straight into Duke's depth and athleticism. What they want is a game that feels sticky. Whistles, set plays, half-court defensive stands, and enough control to keep Duke from stringing together those 10-point avalanches in 90 seconds. That style keeps them alive against the spread, and it almost always drags the scoring environment towards something a little more muted than what a mid-150s number suggests. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, you have an elite defensive outfit at home, a live underdog that actually prefers a more structured game, and a rotation situation that naturally encourages both coaches to manage minutes rather than chase a track meet box score. Honestly, everything in that mix nudges this matchup toward a result that feels intense, loud, and meaningful, but not exactly like a fireworks show on the scoreboard. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Connecticut versus Xavier. Connecticut walks into Cintas like the polished powerhouse, top 5 ranking, banners on the wall, 8-game win streak in their back pocket, and the market is treating them exactly that way with a spread in the 11.5 to 12.5 range on the road against a Xavier crew sitting at 9-4 overall and 7-2 in this building. It sounds simple on paper, big name rolls in, double-digit favorite, but college hoops in a true road gym rarely behaves like a spreadsheet, especially on New Year's Eve when the place is packed, loud, and a little bit emotional. Here is the thing, Connecticut has quietly dropped 3 of 5 at Xavier since jumping back into the Big East, and that same building has watched this Musketeers group snag 6 wins in its last 7, all while breaking in a revamped, portal-heavy roster that feels more like a startup than a blue-chip stock. You can almost picture it. The national brand walks into a fan base that treats these blue blood visits like a holiday. Every Connecticut run gets booed like a bad call. Every Xavier mini surge feels like the crowd just got free drinks, and that kind of noise matters over 40 minutes. Now, nobody is questioning how real Connecticut is. The analytics crowd at places like KenPom have them sitting in the top 10 overall with a top 4 defense. But even an elite defense has to adjust when it runs into a first-year Richard Pitino system that spreads the floor 5 out, drags your bigs away from the rim, and forces you to guard longer, more awkward possessions instead of sprinting out for easy transition buckets. That kind of style turns a double-digit spread into a grind because the underdog is not asked to win the game. They are just asked to make every trip a little uncomfortable, lean on a front line that can stretch the floor, and let the crowd act like a sixth defender whenever Connecticut looks ready to blow the doors off. Honestly, when the market is asking Connecticut to win this by a lot in a building where they have not exactly been automatic, and Xavier has already shown it can hang with good teams while still figuring out its new identity under Pitino, it sets up more like one of those stubborn home dog games that linger inside the number than a clean, drama-free runaway. As our first pick for this matchup, the Xavier Musketeers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Let me explain. Connecticut comes in at 12-1 with that same top 4 national defense, and their whole personality leans towards squeezing a possession for close to the full clock, not racing up and down in a track meet trading haymakers. Their profile this season has been almost stubbornly consistent. Elite defense at the front of the identity, methodical offense sitting right behind it, and a style that feels far more comfortable choking off your options than trying to sprint both teams to 80 points. On the other side, Xavier under Pitino looks pretty loud on the surface, about 77 points a night and close to 10 made threes, and that sounds like a loose, free-flowing group. But when you peel it back a bit, you still see a roster that has been flipped, with new roles, new spacing, and an offense that can easily stretch into long, probing trips when a locked-in defense like Connecticut's gums up the first action. If you have ever watched a team learning a new system against a top-tier defense, you know how often possessions start with good spacing and movement, then slow into a late-clock read, and that kind of pattern is great for underbackers and not so great for people rooting for constant fireworks. Now fold in the setting, a physical conference game vibe, a Connecticut defense that is excellent at running shooters off the three-point line and forcing tougher jumpers, a Xavier team that is likely to value each possession in that environment, and a spread large enough that if Connecticut does control things late, they can milk clock instead of pushing tempo just to stack style points, and you start to feel the rhythm of something closer to a race to 70 than an open gym race to the 80s. So while the raw numbers on the surface whisper offense, the combination of Connecticut's defensive personality, Xavier's still evolving system, and the natural tendency for a game like this to tighten up rather than loosen makes that mid-140s total look a bit rich for what is likely to be a tense, choppy, possession-by-possession kind of night. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. St. John's versus Georgetown. New Year's Eve in DC has a different kind of energy, especially when it is an old Big East rivalry on the floor and the betting market has already decided one side is supposed to play the hero's role in a blowout script. Here, the favorite is walking in with a top 20 pedigree, laying something in that 8 to 9 point neighborhood on the road, and everyone is talking like it is a formality rather than a basketball game with 20-year-olds in a loud building on a holiday night. On the other side, you have a team sitting at 9-4, not flashy, not being talked about on national shows every morning, but quietly stacking wins and playing much better basketball than the price tag suggests. Honestly, that is where this gets interesting. The favorite has been bullying people in its own gyms, racking up comfortable double-digit wins and carrying an overall scoring margin north of plus 14, which looks great in a graphic on television. But that dominance has mostly come inside the friendly split home of Carnesecca and Madison Square Garden, where everything from the sightlines to the rims to the pregame routine leans in their favor. Now the scene shifts to Capital One Arena, and this is a true first road exam, not a neutral floor weekend event. That matters because routines get disrupted, communication on defense gets harder, and all that preseason hype starts to feel heavier when it is you versus 10,000 people who very much want you to stub your toe. Georgetown, for all its recent scars as a program, is not bringing a doormat profile into this one. They are scoring around that high 70s, low 80s range, doing it with solid efficiency, taking care of the ball, and generally refusing to just roll over when a ranked logo shows up on the other bench. They rebound better than the casual fan expects, they are less turnover-prone than their reputation, and under a coach who has clearly raised the floor of the program, they have slid into that annoying lane where opponents do not enjoy playing them, especially in their own building. It is the kind of team that might not end up on a ton of highlight reels, but it is very good at dragging big brands into longer nights than they anticipated. Layer the history and the psychology on top and it gets even more appealing from the underdog side. The favorite has taken 9 straight in this series, which is exactly the sort of streak that inflates both narratives and point spreads, because people remember runs, not context. They also carry the weird weight of a 0-10 record on New Year's Eve going back to 2008, so every mention of the date comes with a reminder that this program simply has not enjoyed this slot on the calendar. Georgetown, meanwhile, is playing with far less pressure, feeding off a home crowd that has been waiting for a real reason to get loud again and leaning into a physical, whistle-drawing style that tends to slow blowouts down, turn them into foul fests, and keep margins from getting completely out of hand. And you add in the reality that the big favorite has already shown some issues closing out high-end opponents and has yet to prove that its dominant home form automatically travels into double-digit road destruction, and you are left with a rivalry home dog that feels far too live to be catching this many points across the full 40 minutes. As our first pick for this matchup, the Georgetown Hoyas to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. On paper, this looks much less like a slow, methodical conference rock fight and much more like the kind of game that occasionally forgets it was supposed to be careful and grinds into something closer to a track meet. The pace numbers tell that story in plain language. The favorite is living around 76.5 possessions per game. The underdog is living around 72, and both offenses are clearing 1.1 points per possession with aggressive free throw profiles. In regular words, that means lots of drives, plenty of contact, a steady stream of whistles, and a whole lot of scoring with the clock stopped. Here is the thing, Georgetown's home identity this season almost sounds like it was written by someone who loves high totals. They have gone 7-0 on overs in their own building, and those games are not sneaking over with a fluky buzzer beater. They are regularly pushing scores into the mid-150s and beyond because their own offense lives in that high 70s to low 80s band, while their defense is generous enough to keep opponents fully involved in the party. They score, they foul, they give up clean looks, and all of that stacks possessions and points in a way that makes a number set in the low 150s feel a little fragile if the game script stays even loosely on schedule. The favorites' total story has been more awkward and honestly, a bit funny on paper. They show up as an underteam at 3-8 against the number, but when you pull back a bit, it is not that their offense is sputtering, it is that the market kept hanging enormous totals in the high 150s and even that comically high one around 179.5 at home. In a lot of those games, they still poured in 80-plus points. The other side simply could not keep pace. When they have seen real resistance, those neutral court matchups with other high major programs, the combined scores have naturally floated into the mid-150s range anyway, which fits the idea that their offensive ceiling is very real once both teams are trading blows. Let me explain why that matters here. You already have two offenses that are efficient, that are happy to live in the paint, and that draw a ton of free throws. Those high free throw attempt rates are not an accident. You have an underdog that has already turned its home floor into a 7-0 over factory, and you have a favorite that plays faster than most people associate with a traditional Big East grinder. Put that together in a rivalry game on a holiday night, when nobody minds running a bit and both benches know there is a national audience watching, and it is very easy to sketch out a game flow where the scoring rhythm never really slows down. If either side builds even a modest 2 or 3 possession cushion late, the foul game can kick in, possessions stretch, and that projected total sitting in the low 150s has plenty of ways to get beaten without anything crazy needing to happen. The numbers, the tempo, and the style all point in the same direction, toward a contest that feels much more like a fireworks show than a slog, which is exactly the kind of environment where a high total can still be cleared comfortably. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.